Hi folks, welcome to the next lecture. This lecture is on neoliberal institutionalism. Now, as with all the terms, they are international relations specific. If you go, realism means something very different if you go into philosophy or something else, right? And neoliberal means something very different if you go into economics. In economics, neoliberalism means the Thatcher-Reagan idea of lowering taxes, small government, small services. And that is not what neoliberal institutionalism is about. So, and it's probably better to just call it institutionalism, but it gets its liberalism from the positive outlook it has of solving the problems of structural realism by using institutions. So we'll talk about that today. So just to recap where we are in the list of liberalisms. So we last lecture we covered the Enlightenment and how that the liberalism or the freedom, right, of the Enlightenment, so freedom from superstition, and then Republican liberalism, freedom from kings, commercial liberalism, so free trade or freedom from government-created monopolies, and then that can be translated into, or it helps you understand democratic countries' foreign policy, because it's unlike a Marxist interpretation of a capitalist expansion. It's actually more driven by this idea of a democratic peace, that democracies are safer for democracies. And then we just briefly looked at political philosophy, just in terms of that political philosophy is about trying to make our political systems better for individuals, right? To help achieve the good life for everyone. So this lecture, we're going to look at neoliberal institutionalism. Okay, so we covered the wars, especially the end of the 30 Years' War that established the Peace of Westphalia, that has created the system of states that we now find ourselves in. So here I want to move on to talking about how institutions, at least in the theory of neoliberal institutionalism, the institutionalists believe that institutions can solve the many problems of cooperation that come up when you're dealing with this system of independent states. Okay, and normally here, when I'm at uni, I in a university setting, I play a clip of a game show called Golden Balls, and it's a particular one of a fairly well set guy and a very non-threatening, angelic girl, and they are contestants on this game show, and there's a large monetary prize, something like $100,000, I think, something like that. But the owners of that copyright keep banning my video for it, so I'll just have to paint the picture for you. So the rules of the game is that if they both agree to split the money, then they get half each. But if one person says split and the other person says steal, then the person that says steal gets all of the money, and the person that said split gets nothing. And if they both say steal, then they get nothing. So the tension of the game is that they have to both decide and reveal their decisions with a little sign simultaneously. And so there's a lot of talking, right? The guy's trying to convince the girl that he's not going to betray her, that they should split this, $100,000, and she's like, she's saying, look, don't steal, can I trust you? Can I trust you? Like, are you going to betray me? And he's like, look, if I betrayed you, this audience will come down here and hang me, right? Like, you can trust me, right? Like, absolutely, I will share this money with you. $50,000, that's more money than I've, ever made, right? Look, and so he's really convinced her to share, that he will share the money, right? And so they open their little signs, their clamshell signs, and the surprise is that the girl chose steal and the guy chose share. So pretty brutal and surprising, right? Took you by surprise. And that illustrates the problem that structural realism and the security dilemma highlights, in that you can't read minds, you can't know the intentions of people. So what's the winning strategy? So game theory is a little sub branch of international relations that looks at that puts political decisions, in payoff matrices like this, and they try and simplify or expose what the payoffs are, right? So the payoff matrix here for Golden Balls game, with player 1 on the top and player 2 on the bottom of each square. And so if they both split, then they both get half each. But if player 2 splits and player 1 steals, then player 2 gets 0 and player 1 gets everything, right? And vice versa. If player 1 splits and player 2 steals, then player 2 gets everything and player 1 gets 0. And in the bottom right hand corner, if they both steal, they both get 0, right? So that's the rules of the game put into a payoff matrix. So what's the winning strategy? Well, ask yourself, if you're player 1, what is your best move if you know player 2 is going to split? So your best move is going to be to steal, right? Okay, again, if you're player 1, what is your best move if you know player 2 is going to steal? It's steal, right? The problem with the prisoner's dilemma is that it's always the most rational thing to defect from any agreement, to not cooperate, right? And so the problem with the prisoner's dilemma is that if everyone acts rationally, everyone ends up worse off. And so how do we go from the bottom right, where both steal or both don't cooperate and everyone gets 0, or so how do we get it up into both sides splitting, both sides cooperating, so everyone's a winner, right? That is the key problem that structural realism reveals, right? So, how is a peace treaty how is an arms treaty like a prisoner's dilemma, right? It's like a prisoner's dilemma because if we sign a peace agreement where we both agree to disarm, and I disarm and you don't, right? You start building up your weapons, right? So I'm cooperating, but you're defecting. It's like I split and you steal. You get to conquer me, and I get defeated. So it's very much like a prisoner's dilemma. So here's the classic version of the prisoner's dilemma, right? So you may well have heard it. It's the most famous of the game theorists' analogies, and the classic version of it is that two people are arrested for a lesser crime, so say breaking and entering, but the police think that they're guilty of murder but don't have any evidence. So the police put them in separate rooms and give them this offer. If one confesses to being involved in a murder and the other guy doesn't confess, then the confessor will become state's witness and get off scot-free, right? 0 years in jail. And so if he betrays his partner, and if the other one doesn't talk at all, so cooperates, right, he'll get 20 years, and vice versa. If they both confess, both will get 5 years, as presumably they'll both say that they were accomplices, not the actual murderer, right? So they'll both get 5 years, or sorry, I'll put 5 years. And but if they both stay silent, they'll only do 1 year in jail for breaking and entering. So again, it's the same payoff matrix, just using different numbers and different, different. Here it's jail time, and the other one, it's in golden balls, it's money, but it's the same payoff structure, right? That the problem is the most rational thing for both players is to not cooperate, right? To betray their partner. And betraying in this case is talking to the police and not staying silent. And in that case, they both do 5 years, right? They both end up worse off than they needed to be. They could both do 1 year by cooperating. So how do we solve that problem? And this is a real structural, realist sort of problem. So how does neoliberalism solve the prisoner's dilemma? So the solution that neoliberal institutionalists or institutionalism says is that it's all about communication. It's all about verification. So for the classic prisoner's dilemma, then the prisoners need to be in the same room, right? They can't be separated, so that each can hear and verify what the other is saying. And it's this verification aspect that is key. So if you've got a arms treaty where you've both said you're going to get rid of nuclear weapons, right? To ensure that cooperation is made possible, to avoid a prisoner's dilemma situation, you have to have an institution of verification, right? And so the US and the Soviets had a whole series of exchanging inspectors, and through that system, that institution, that they were able to change the incentives of from a prisoner's dilemma to a cooperative outcome. Right? And so you can see that it was the prisoner's dilemma type problem is really what killed the League of Nations, right? For each country, because if Germany wasn't a threat to them, then why would they get involved in protecting someone else? Why would they go to war with Germany, right? But that's what the League of Nations needed, right? So these prisoner dilemma problems are extremely common in the relationships between states, right? But the institutionalists say that you can build institutions that solve these cooperation problems by using verification and so forth. Okay, so various types of, there are some sub-theories to neoliberal institutionalism. The first is functionalism. So this is agencies performing specific functions should be the way we organise interactions between states. So rather than just diplomacy, you have a United Nations agency that coordinates it, right? Neo-functionalism or new functionalism, this is where agencies should aim to organise common goods, right? Public goods, that should be their aim. Regime theory, so this is the argument that the state system isn't an anarchy, it actually has a structure, and state behaviour is determined by norms and institutions and the regimes, right? So this is a direct, more forceful argument for the institutionalists that there is a ruling regime, it's just cooperative, or maybe not. Right? State cartel theory. So this is a theory imported from economics where war isn't an option, right? Due to developments in interdependence and military tech, war is much less an option now. So now states use cartelization to push interests, right? So it's almost like a voting system where especially aid and things like that are used to sort of buy countries' votes in UN votes and things like that. But okay. Rational choice institutionalism. So this aims to explain collective decisions as an outcome of preferences and institutional rules, right? So by changing the rules, you can change the preferences of states. Historical institutionalism. So not only do institutions shape decisions, but they also are path dependent, which means that previous choices and events lock states into a path that becomes increasingly difficult to deviate from. And so historical institutionalism makes the argument that this path dependency means that cooperation leads to more cooperation, and it's very, very hard to sort of break out of that path, which is a good thing, right? And neoliberal institutionalism, so states are driven by absolute gains rather than relative, right? That's a foundational assumption of neoliberal institutionalism. So institutions can solve the problem of cheating, right? Okay, so neoliberals' key assumptions. and they share many of these assumptions with structural realists, especially defensive structural realists. So states are key actors, but not the only significant actors. So you can have organized violence in sub-state groups, right? And you've got multinational organizations and that sort of thing. So, but states are still the key actors. All actors are rational, always seeking to maximize their interests in all areas. As rational actors, states are not concerned with the relative gains of others. Rather, they want absolute gains for themselves. Thus, they prefer cooperation to conflict. Conflict is very costly. Even if you win, it can sap your energy and leave you behind. So, the greatest obstacle to cooperation is a lack of information and fears of cheating that creates. This obstacle is addressed by international organizations or institutions. International institutions are neutral. They are there to lower the transaction costs and generate stable cooperative environments. If institutions are seen as mutually beneficial by states, then they will shift their loyalties to these institutions. States are more interested in absolute gains than relative gains. So all of these would fit in a defensive realist list of assumptions, right? So there's a lot of synergy between neoliberal institutionalism and neo-structural realism. So this is how structural realism explains state behavior. So we're in a state of anarchy. There's no functional differentiation between units. So they're all their overriding goal is survival, and the outcomes are really determined by the changing distribution of capabilities. So the balance of power. So how institutionalism explains state behavior is the same as the first three, but then they just add these institutional effects, right? So the security dilemma is able to be managed and cooperation made possible by instituting some sort of organizational verification, and they can change the incentives from defecting to cooperating. Okay, so Robert Keohane is one of the leading advocate of neoliberal institutionalism, and so he puts the central question is, how do institutions affect the incentives facing states? He goes on to say, the principal thesis is that variations in the institutionalization of world politics exert significant impacts on the behavior of governments. In particular, patterns of cooperation and discord can be understood only in the context of institutions that help define the meaning and importance of state action. So the fact that we have a United Nations, it introduces a set of regimes or institutions that change the debate, they bring to the forefront the debates between states, and they help. By having that forum to discuss and debate, it defines the meaning of cooperation or being recalcitrant, right? So the fact that there was what was called the Neoneo Debate, so the neo-structural realists against the neoliberal institutionalists, And so this, in the 80s and 90s, there was this back and forth between these two positions. And so neo-realists see anarchy as placing more severe constraints on state behaviour than neoliberals. Neo-realists see cooperation as harder to achieve than neoliberals. Neoliberals stress absolute gains, whereas neo-realists argues that relative gains are far more important to states. Right? So it makes cooperation very difficult if you think that relative gains are the most important, because by cooperating, even if you gain less than the other guy, then in relative terms you've lost, right? And so that makes, if relative gains are the focus of states, then it will make cooperation very difficult. Neo-realists assume anarchy means states are preoccupied with issues of survival, whereas neoliberals focused on economics and trade, right, and the benefits of that. Right? Neo-realists focused on capabilities, specifically military capabilities, whereas neoliberals focus on perceptions of intentions. Right? And so neoliberal focus, or an institutional focus, is using verification to remove the threat of cheating, so you can control the security dilemma. And lastly, neo-realists do not think that institutions and regimes can mitigate the effects of anarchy. The neo-realists think that these international organisations are really just a way of the strong controlling the weak, whereas neoliberals see them as a way of not controlling, but changing the incentives for everyone involved by removing the ability of people to cheat, right? And so people maintain cooperation. Okay, so now I just want to pull on the brakes on my explanation of the Neoneo debate, right? And just take a step aside to explain what's called the Interparadigm Debate between rationalism and reflectivism. And I need to explain this so you understand the result of the Neoneo debate, right? So bear with me. So Neoneo rationalism, so both neo-structural realism and neoliberal institutionalism can both be categorized as rationalist theories versus other theories that use what's called reflectivism or interpretation. So I'll explain what these two sides are. So this is a quote from Robert Keohane, who is a neoliberal institutionalist, right? And he's arguing against the reflectivists. These reflectivist authors emphasize the importance of intersubjective meanings of international institutional activity. Intersubjective meanings is if we both have the same meaning for something, then that is intersubjective, right? In their view, understanding how people think about institutional norms and rules and the discourse they engage in is as important in evaluating the significance of these norms as measuring the behaviour that changes in response to their invocation. To continue, it would be fair to refer to them as interpretive scholars, since they all emphasize the importance of historical and textual interpretation and the limitations of scientific models in studying world politics. Right? But other approaches also have a right to be considered interpretive. I have therefore coined a phrase for these writers, calling them reflective, since all of them emphasize the importance of human reflection for the nature of institutions and ultimately for the character of world politics. So, the rationalist position, also called the quantitative or the behavioralist or the positive approach, right? So it was called all of these things, but had a big focus on statistical analysis of politics. So this is their basic approach. Number one, research can discover uniformities in human behavior. Number two, these uniformities can be confirmed by empirical tests and measurements. Number three, quantitative data is of the highest quality and should be analysed statistically. And number four, political science should be empirical and predictive, downplaying the philosophical and historical dimensions. And number five, value-free research was the ideal, right? So not normative, not trying to come up with better ways of seeing the world, just explaining things in a value-free way. And number six, social sciences should search for a macro theory covering all the social sciences as opposed to applied issues of practical reform. So the methods that they use is sampling and interviewing and scoring and scaling and statistical analysis, right? So it's this very, very scientific approach to studying politics. Whereas Hedley Bull is a reflectivist or an interpretist, and so he has a qualitative approach, and this is what he says of behavioralists. The approach to theorizing that derives from philosophy, history and law is characterized above all by explicit reliance upon the exercise of judgment and by the assumption that if we confine ourselves to strict standards of verification and proof, there is very little of significance that can be said about international relations. So you have the two sides here. Hedley Bull's side, or the qualitative approach, says that humans are about context and trying to find a better way of organizing and relating with each other. And these things just can't be added up and a statistical correlation found, right? Politics is about creating as well as responding. So Keohane, neoliberalist institutionalist, some quotes from him. I propose to show on the basis of their assumptions that the characteristic pessimism of realism does not follow. I seek to demonstrate that realist assumptions about world politics are consistent with the formation of institutionalized arrangements containing rules and principles which promote cooperation. Neoliberal institutionalism shares some of the most important intellectual commitments with neorealism. Like neorealists, neoliberal institutionalists seek to explain behavioral regularities by examining the nature of the decentralized international system. Neither neorealist nor neoliberal institutionalists are content with interpreting texts. Both sets of theorists believe that there is an international political reality that can be partly understood, even if it will always remain to some extent veiled. So this is not the Interparadigm Debate. This is not about incommensurable paradigms. We agree on 90%, and the remainder is essentially an empirical question that can be solved with experiments and analysis and observation, right? So he's saying that there's not that much of a disagreement. This is the disagreement. The Neoneo debate is not a paradigm debate. So so by the end of the 90s, there was the Neoneo debate about how to interpret became the Neoneo synthesis. And that was saying that the Neoneo debate is not about how to interpret reality or the way to do theory. The Neos are much closer than their non-Neo theoretical predecessors. So both neo-realists and institutionalists assume that state's most basic preference is to survive. So there is no debate when survival is at stake. What institutionalists argue is that when preferences are made more varied and complex and difficult to determine, so for example, preferences over details of a trade agreement or details to limit carbon dioxide or something like that, then institutionalism can offer far better explanations than realism, right? If we come to an agreement over how to solve global warming, then the institutionalists are saying that they'll have a better explanation of why that occurred and how than structural neo-realists. Okay, so a pretty heavy theory-laden lecture. I'm sorry about that. It's hard to find videos or pictures or anything to really illustrate the background of it. But to just summarize what we've covered, we looked at the prisoner's dilemma, which is an analogy that about the problems of cooperation. Right? The neoliberal institutionalist solution is organized verification. And there was a debate between neo-realists and neoliberal institutionalists, but that debate sort of ended in a standoff because both agreed strongly that positivist and quantitative methods of research, statistical analysis, was really the best way to do research, and they were both united and called themselves rationalist approaches. They were united in their rejection of more quantitative, interpretive, reflectivist approaches that they criticised. So that's a whirlwind tour of neoliberalism and really to finish off liberalisms in general. So I hope you found that informative, and I stay safe and well, and I will see you in the next lecture.